So if Mexican drug cartels ran Seattle, would they do anything different? Would the public policies enacted, supported, and funded by the Seattle City Council, would that be any different? So let's find out. Now, I must first start out this video with a brief disclaimer. I'm not saying that Mexican drug cartels are currently running or in charge of the Seattle City Council. Sure, they're definitely involved in supplying the ever-increasing piles of drugs like meth, fentanyl, etc. that are far easier to find on the streets of Seattle than an honest politician. But to the best of my knowledge, the current Seattle City Council is not actually controlled, funded, or clearly manipulated by Mexican drug cartels. Okay, with that silly and probably unnecessary disclaimer out of the way, let's get on with the show. And oh, if you like this video and you want to see more like it in the future, please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe on this channel. You can do that down below. It's very easy to do and it only takes a second. I also encourage your comments. I appreciate comments from those who disagree. And if you think I'm wrong and you believe Mexican drug cartels actually do run the city of Seattle, tell me why in the comment section below, for example. YouTube and our Attorney General Bob Ferguson might censor you, but I will not, and I'll try to respond to a good portion of the comments that I receive. So back to the city of Seattle and the question of whether the public policies that we see enacted in the city would be any different if the city of Seattle was informally controlled by Mexican drug cartel. Now, we all know these Mexican drug cartels run a decent portion of the drug supplies for Seattle, but what would it look like if they actually controlled the Seattle City Council itself? So let's start out with the priorities of a Mexican drug cartel. Obviously, the highest priority is to increase their profit from selling their product. I mean, clearly, as a criminal enterprise, they would be willing to pick up extra cash just like they do in Mexico today. For example, it's well known that the drug cartels in Mexico control the human smuggling on the southern border. Why not? In many ways, it's more profitable than smuggling drugs and probably a bit less risky. We've seen these cartels involved in kidnapping, hijacking oil shipments, and even some agricultural products when the profit's high enough. Now, this doesn't even include the money laundering operations that they manage. So, okay, for the sake of argument, if a Mexican drug cartel were able to manipulate the election process in Seattle, say using the democracy vouchers or some other shady electioneering practice, and they had the Seattle City Council that they wanted, what type of policies would they implement? Now, obviously, they would want to sell more of their product in the city to drug addicts and grow their customer base. I mean, drug addict tent cities would be a perfect way to concentrate customers, and it would make distribution quite a bit easier. So this part of Seattle's current public policy would probably be indistinguishable from what a drug cartel would want to see. I mean, they're already doing this. Related to this objective, drug dealers would want to make it easier for their customers to get their product, so the cartel would see a lot of wisdom in reducing the cost of living for drug addicts, and these are their customers, so that more of the cash that these addicts get will go to pay for the product that the cartel's very happy to provide. So reducing costs by providing free tents, pallets, stoves, clothing, food, propane stoves, bus tickets, and other basic costs would free up more cash and essentially improve inventory turnover for the drug dealers. Now, Seattle encourages all these policies already, so it's actually difficult to see where there would be any difference with that public policy, regardless of whether you had the current city council or a drug cartel running the city. Now, secondly, related to the first objective, a drug cartel would want to keep their customers and potential customers alive as long as possible so that they could keep buying the meth or fentanyl that they're selling. A dead druggie won't buy more fentanyl, so it just makes good business sense to keep them alive with free needles and free health care, free Narcan, and maybe even better housing so that the druggie gravy train can continue to flow. Eventually, of course, druggies do tend to die at a pretty high and disturbing rate, but there's obviously a lot of cash that can be extracted from this population before they do die, and a cartel would want to keep them going as long as possible until they're all used up. Really, I can't see much of a difference between this objective and how the city of Seattle currently operates today. Now, thirdly, a drug cartel would want the police to be defunded, reduced in size, and restricted in how much they can actually enforce any of the laws. I mean, increasingly, lawlessness would be a great cover for increasing the amount of cash that flows into the local drug addicts' pockets, and in turn, which would flow up to the cartel. Allowing theft rings to flourish and reducing the crime enforcement by the police would really help sell more drugs, and it would make it easier for the drug addicts to get more cash to pay for those drugs. So additionally, of course, that this policy would also allow the cartel to have additional profit opportunities with fencing operations and similar bonus projects in the city. So right now, I don't see any daylight between how the city of Seattle operates and how a Mexican drug cartel would run the city. But of course, the absurd homeless drug addict policies are just a part of what the Seattle City Council does. So would a drug cartel want the city of Seattle to be a sanctuary city? Well, of course they would. I mean, that would make the human trafficking part of the modern drug cartel business flourish as well. The illegal immigrants would be prime pickings for potential cartel employees and getting them hooked on drugs and other gray or black market opportunities as needed. Would a drug cartel want the city of Seattle to restrict firearm ownership? Well, of course they would. If the city of Seattle could make legal firearm ownership completely illegal or restricted, then only the criminals supported by the cartel would have the guns, and it'd be harder for regular citizens to resist the criminals or protect themselves. So this is just common sense. It would make it far easier for the drug cartel to operate a very profitable venture in the city of Seattle. Would a drug cartel want to encourage free public transportation? You bet. Because that would help them save druggies the cost of travel and make it easier for them to move about the city without spending any of their cash on bus rides, and that cash could instead be used to pay for the drug dealers. Now, would a drug cartel support billions of dollars funneled out of the public coffers via grants and other kickback schemes to nonprofit organizations like Lehigh, who are theoretically helping with the homeless, but who actually achieve nothing but a bigger budget for next year's appropriation and grant kickback scheme? Well, of course they would, because this would be a bonanza for the cartel. I mean, they would love every unaudited grant. I mean, this would simply be a separate income stream for the cartel. Just like the mob and organized crime made mad money with government contracts on the East Coast, the drug cartel can easily profit in a similar way in Seattle. The cartel would use these operations to subsidize their employee and distribution costs as well. So everyone wins. So, of course, taxpayers don't win, but they would be able to support this policy. I don't see much of a difference. Now, is there any current public policy the Seattle City Council has implemented which wouldn't be supported by a Mexican drug cartel? I can't really think of anything right now. The policies implemented by the Seattle City Council, which don't obviously benefit a drug cartel, would likely be window dressing that the drug cartel would use to keep their involvement secret and hidden. Even in Mexico or Colombia or in other countries where they have great influence, the cartels kind of keep their control over the politicians or the military a secret. So I would expect the same when and if they control the city in America, like Seattle. So I'm asking my viewers to tell me where I'm wrong. Point out the policy that I'm missing here. Exactly what public policy in the city of Seattle would be different if a Mexican drug cartel ran the city instead of the current city council crop? I mean, let me know what I missed, and I'm happy to produce another video which would help distinguish how the current city council in Seattle is actually most definitely the city very different than what a drug cartel would support. I'm looking forward to your comments. I think it's going to be very important to find out. Now, finally, if we can't distinguish between the public policies endorsed by our local government officials and the policies that would be supported by international criminal drug cartels, I would think that might, just maybe, be concerning for those of us who actually care about good public policy. Perhaps something's seriously wrong with the current in vogue policies, which have been so strangely, so enthusiastically supported by our local elected officials. It's never too late to change, and I'm concerned that almost nobody in local government can see or is willing to admit that they see kind of this total failure in almost everything that they're doing right now. And I believe it is possible to fix local government policies. It isn't a mandatory requirement that we destroy our urban centers and then pack them full of criminals and drug addicts. We don't have to support, obviously corrupt and dishonest nonprofit groups who only make things worse. None of this is inevitable, nor is it required public policy, not as much as our current crop of political leaders seem to claim that it is. We can change this trajectory, but it will require very different policies and probably very different people in charge. At some point, the people who live in these communities will need to decide if they want to see change. Until then, the current virtue signaling policies will continue to make Seattle, and other cities just like Seattle, who kind of follow these same policies, nearly indistinguishable from the policies endorsed by the drug cartels.